Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. It means so much to me that you took this time to listen to some astrology, to listen to a really great conversation that I have with astrologer Nadiya Shah. I'll be introducing Nadia in just a few minutes. We talk about the eclipse that's coming up on April 8th. We talk about love and relationships. We talk about spiritual awakenings and some of the astrological cycles that indicate those great big shifts in our own personal lives and in the world. So it's a conversation that you won't want to miss. It's so full of inspiration and full of Nadia's wisdom that you can take and you can apply to your life and really gain some context for what's happening in the world. So that's coming up in just a few minutes. But I wanted to start with talking about two astrological events that are taking place this week. We always start the show with a brief overview of the astrology of the week so that you know what to expect. You can go into the week feeling prepared, feeling empowered, feeling aware of what to expect. And the biggest transit that's taking place this week is that Mercury is going retrograde. What does Mercury retrograde mean? Mercury retrograde is an optical illusion. This is important. Keep that in mind. I come back to that in just a second. Mercury, every 3 to 4 times a year, for about 3 weeks at a time, Mercury gives us the impression, the illusion, that it's moving backward. Why is it important that this is an illusion? One, because a lot of things happen in our lives that we feel like are big events. And Mercury retrograde allows us during those time periods, we face a lot of our insecurities, we face our fears, a lot of the big life challenges that we have, the big relationship patterns, those fears of being left out or abandoned or not having enough resources, those, all of that comes up to the surface. It's like the things that are trapped in the deep recesses of our psyche become visible for us. And it can feel like, "Ah, this is really hard. And if we keep in mind that Mercury retrograde is an optical illusion, then we move through some of those experiences knowing that this is up for a period of time and our fears, our limiting beliefs, those are illusions too. So we get to really work through some of that inner turmoil and we come out on the other side. During Mercury retrograde, it's a time of introspection. It's a time when we take a pause and we rethink some of the decisions that we might have made. And Mercury stations retrograde on April 1st. Now, it's going to be stationing direct again on the 25th. And on the 1st, there's a concentration of energy when Mercury stations retrograde because it shows us all of those life circumstances that need to come out for us to review, to reflect on, and to reorient ourselves to. And so it's a time of slowing down. And sometimes we feel that just with delays. Like sometimes your computer might stop. If you need to take a break, Mercury retrograde is one of those times when it's good to take a break and it's good to be proactive about it. It's also a time when we can have upgrades to our electronic devices, to our communication devices, because we have to rethink how we express ourselves to others in our lives and how we express ourselves to the world. So it gives us opportunities to do that in a more dynamic way, in a more powerful way, and in a way that's more in alignment with who we are, that's more in integrity. So these are the kinds of things that come up. The other transit that is taking place this week is that Venus is meeting up with Neptune on the 3rd, and the Sun is going to be meeting up with the North Node on the 4th. And so there's a lot of focus on relationships, what dreams we have that aren't being fulfilled, what desires we have, what like disappointments we have in our relationships. So there's a big emphasis on relationships. And because we're right in the middle of those 2 weeks between eclipses, that all gets intensified. So it's a great week to do a little extra self care, to reach out to someone who you know is having a hard time. Even if you're having a hard time, sometimes that's the best thing that you can do. So be extra gentle with yourself, be extra gentle with others. And if you have relationship challenges, know that it's a time for refining how you love and how you are loved and how available you are for love. So those challenges can be breadcrumbs that lead you to a new pathway, a new relationship pathway, a new way of being in relationships. And this is something that Nadia and I talk about. So I don't want to wait anymore because I'm so excited about this conversation with Nadia and I cannot wait to let you hear it. So I'm going to sum up our astrology of the week. If you'd like more information, you can always join us on our community. Go to the rachellangShow.com. We talk about more there. And with no further ado, please welcome the next segment of our show, my conversation with Nadiya Shah. Today, I have one of my favorite astrologers, one of the astrologers I listen to when I need a little extra insight about what's happening in the world, Nadiya Shah. Nadia is one of the best astrologers, actually one of the 12 best astrologers on the planet, according to the French Vanity Fair. She has a really significant YouTube following. She started the Synchronicity University, which is a place where you can go and you can learn just about anything that you want to learn about astrology and about metaphysics. Nadia has really paved the way for other astrologers. And one thing I love about her, she is an Aquarius and she really embodies the very best aspects and qualities of the sign of Aquarius. And that is that she's always lifting up others. So today we are going to talk about a little bit about what's happening in the astrological story, the astrological skies for today. So everyone join me in welcoming Nadia. Welcome, Nadia.
Thank you, Rachel. Congratulations on your new podcast. As soon as I saw you announce it, I was like, yes, this is what Rachel should be doing. And I'm just really grateful to be one of the first people, I think, on your podcast as well, right? Thank
You
you for
are. Yeah,
that
yeah.
honor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I love collaborating with you. The times when we have collaborated together, it's just been so much fun. And so I thought this like who else who would I can't even talk. I'm so excited. But who would I rather talk to?
You're so
Uh
cute. You're amazing.
yeah. So Nadia, there y- you and I think we started astrology around the same time. I think we've been in the practice of it for about the same period of time. What led you to astrology? Because you have an interesting history and interesting background.
Yeah. So basically, different divinatory mystical practices have been part of my family ancestry going back many centuries, actually. We can trace it back all the way to like 1,500 years ago. So there's a really established history, but in my more immediate surroundings, not necessarily, right? My aunts and my mom, really, they were like fans of astrology, fans of psychics. And so I grew up with that around my life ever since I can remember. And when I was 14 years old, it just so happened by chance that I got a job as a palm reader at a fair. So basically, I went at 14. I lied about my age. I said I was 16 because I have three planets in my sixth house in my chart. And I could not wait to start working. Like, I think when I was young, I remember telling people, I can't wait to start working. And I think it's because one of the reasons is because my parents are feminists. And ever since I can remember, they would emphasize how important it is for a woman to make her own money, how important it is for me to be with somebody because I want to be, not because I'm financially dependent and have to be. And so that was really drilled into me at a very young age. But I think it was also, it represented so much more, right? It represented usefulness, it represented doing something, having my own agency. And so I was 14 years old. I went to a job fair for this big fair that happens the last 3 weeks of summer every year here in Toronto. It's called the Canadian National Exhibition. And so I went, I lied, I said I'm 16 years old. And the person who interviewed me, because there were all these tables and people just interviewing you as you go along the tables, They just looked at me, talked to me for 2 or 3 minutes and said, okay, learn this and start tomorrow. And it was literally a picture of a hand with arrows on it. And it was like, this is the heart line. This is the headline. This is what it means if it goes here, if it goes there. And so I went, and for 3 weeks, I did that. And I remember every day being told how good I was at this.
Mm.
And my mom and my aunts were like elated. And my mom would brag about it like anytime we were at gatherings. And then people kept putting their hands in my face. And I didn't like that very much. But then it was right around that time my mom also started giving me astrology books at 14 years old. And she said, here, oh, I think you'll be good at this. So I think they just really wanted somebody in the family to pick this up.
Mhm.
And I remember at 19, my aunt giving me tarot decks and saying, here, I think you're going to be good at this. And that night, me doing tarot readings for her clients who would come for aesthetic services, right? She'd be like giving them a wax or something, or giving them a pedicure. And I'd be like doing a tarot reading for them right there as a teenager still. And I think that it just sort of very organically grew. Like, I remember when I worked at Walmart before I went to university, doing chart readings for my fellow associates behind the counter. And then one day I was working at a call center. I was in university, and people started offering me, they said, hey, I'll give you $10 if you read my chart. I heard you do charts. I'm learning this. What about we do a trade? It was like that kind of thing. And it just literally grew from there. And it became so organic. Now, when I had my Saturn return, like that was quite a while back now, like 20 years now. But
Mhm.
when I had my Saturn return, to me, it was like lots of things were happening in my chart. And it kicked off like sort of a dark night of the soul. And that was a very painful time for me. And through that time, astrology was there. And on the other side of that time is when I became a full time astrologer. And it's just been all systems go
Mhm.
since then. And what an incredible journey. I had no idea that this is what the higher vision that a universe, a loving universe, could have planned for me.
Yes.
And it's been pretty amazing. So it'll be good to see what's up next. Back then, it was Pluto conjunct my moon that changed my path.
Mhm.
And I'll be coming up to Pluto conjunct my sun pretty soon. And so let's see what's next. Let's see what the next chapters are. But I hope it's still in astrology because I love being an astrologer. I love this community. I love connecting with incredible people like you as well. So, and thank you for the lovely things you said about me. It's so wonderful and affirming. And I love inspiring people. And so
Mhm.
it means so much that I inspired you in some way.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Now, just we have people who are listeners who don't know anything about astrology. So I want to go
Okay.
back to a couple few things that you said. And so what can you describe what a Saturn return is?
Sure. Thank you. You're such a great interviewer. See, I have to do this when I interview people as well, take a bit of a step back.
Uh-huh.
And so returns are really powerful in astrology because they speak to when a planet travels all the way around the zodiac and comes back to, returns to where it was at the moment of your first breath, at the moment of your birth. And it always is some type of awakening or homecoming, if you will. And so we're very used to saying many happy returns or happy solar return, because that's once a year when the sun returns to where it was when you took your first breath, when you were born. But there are other planets. The entire universe is represented in us, and we are the universe. And that shows in the chart. And some returns are more rare than the sun, where the sun happens every year. Yeah, you'll get a return of Mercury return, Venus returns to where it was when you were born about once a year as well. Mars about every 2 years. Jupiter every 12 years. So the Jupiter return is thought to be a time of big blessings, fulfillment, and lots of good luck, right? To put it in a very simplistic way. The Saturn return is even more rare. It's every 28 and a half years. And you start feeling it around 27. It's over when you're 30. And so that is the other really big return that we'll go through over a lifetime. The next is around 84, 86. You'll have your Uranus return when Uranus comes back. And that's always a big breakthrough time. And then if you live to 160, now, ever since I was a child, I have told my family that I was going to live to 150. But now I'm thinking, wouldn't it be cool to have a Neptune return? I
Oh,
think I want to see a Neptune return. And so if you live to 160, like I will, I'll see you there and we will celebrate our Neptune returns together.
I love that. I've actually had that thought. And what's cool is businesses have birth charts, countries and cities have birth charts. And so we can see big changes that happen in the Pluto return, which is every 248 years, and the Neptune return, which is every 100 and, like you said, 65 years. So yeah, those are pivotal moments. So let's go back to your Saturn return, because you talked about how your Saturn
It's
return
serious.
really changed your life. And how was astrology? What was happening for you at that time? You don't have to go into too much of the personal if you don't want to. If you want to, you can. We're chatting. But how did astrology help you through that big transition in your life?
I think the main thing is Saturn returns are thought to be a really serious time. It's a time when you really have to get honest with yourself, and that can be challenging. It's about evaluating what you've manifested, what you feel good about, what you regret. And it is considered one of those transits that takes us from youth into adulthood, into a whole other phase of life. And for me, it was a hard transition, put it that way. What did I realize? I think with astrology, it was the way in which astrology was there for me. The
Mm,
way in which astrology showed me that all things have a time, they have a season, they have a cycle, there's a transit, and that season, that cycle, that transit will be over. And when it's hard where you are right now, it can be very comforting to know that this is just for a period of time. Now, I've since learned that even with the hard stuff, if I can sort of reconfigure my relationship to it, my perception to it, if I can think, how is this a part of my becoming more wise, becoming more loving? And I can reflect back now, and it was such a time of so much pain. There were other things happening in my chart as well, but when I look back now, I see how that was a time where I really cultivated so much inner perseverance, inner strength, a time when I had no choice but to trust the universe, a time when I did a lot of work to heal old stuff so that it no longer controlled me. It no longer determined my automatic reactions and responses and interpretations to the world. And that's where so much valuable work happened that set a foundation from which I've been able to build something that I feel really good about in terms of my life and my agency and my independence and my freedom and work that's really rewarding to me as well. And so I think all of that kind of came together, the personal knowing
mhm.
that everything has its wisdom, but then also seeing how astrology fit into that understanding. I think that became part of why it was on the other side. I ended up a full time astrologer.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And what that's allowing me to reflect on is just how y- astrology has become so popular. And I don't know about you, but I noticed when COVID happened, that 2020, there was a big astrology happening in 2020. And at that time, people who didn't really give any credibility to astrology, or people who actually tried to debunk it or consider it a pseudoscience, all of a sudden started to come back around and look at it and actually work with it, like you're saying, to try to find meaning in what was happening in the world. So, can you talk a little bit about, do you think that the fact that things have been so intense over the last several years, do you think that's a contributing factor to astrology being more popular or more recognized?
So I actually think, and this might be a bit of an unpopular belief, and I know not every astrologer connects it this way, but I actually think that astrology being more popular now is because of Neptune and Pisces. I think that one of the unassuming but really profound statements that astrology makes is that we are not alone, that we are loved by a universe. We're part of the unfolding of the universe. And when we feel connected to the sky, we feel less alone. And we can then see how we might be connected to others as well. When it's sometimes scary to feel connected to others, because that means a more immediate vulnerability. Being connected to the sky allows us to open ourselves up in our own time as we are ready to. And it allows us to learn something about ourselves. One of my former professors, Patrick Curry, he has actually used some of the work of Max Weber. So Max Weber is considered the godfather of sociology and modern sociology. And Max Weber talked about the iron cage of postmodernism, this idea that we live in closer proximity than ever before to each other, but we feel more alone and separated from each other than ever before. And Patrick Curry believes that astrology provides the soothing balm, if you will. It provides an answer to that loneliness by connecting us to the cosmos. And I think that's really powerful to consider. Last time, historically, when we had 160 something years ago, when Neptune was in Pisces, that was a time of this very profound surge of interest in matters spiritual of all
Right.
kinds. And that's also where we see, for example, in that context, one of my favorite astrologers historically is Alan Leo, and
Mhm.
he wrote Esoteric Astrology. And so in Esoteric Astrology, he talks about how your consciousness determines how it is that you experience your chart. That depending on the level of awareness of the client, their experience of what's happening with the astrological transits and their natal chart is going to be different than someone who's operating at maybe not as conscious a level. But he was somebody who talked a lot about past lives and karma, and he took some principles of Indian astrology, Vedic astrology, and infused it into a more Western paradigm with esoteric astrology. And I share this because I think that's speaking to or in some way connected to what we have been feeling here on Earth at this time in history, because it was back in 2012 that Neptune stepped into Pisces, moved into Pisces. And since then, I've noticed this like uptick, right? Like, and
Mm.
then we had the pandemic, of course. And the pandemic left a lot of people feeling very powerless.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's the thing. Like, we, in many ways, part of growing up psychologically, becoming an adult, according to Freud, is to accept what he called the cruelty of fate. This idea that we have a lot less control than we'd like to appreciate. Now, I think that there's a certain balance there to be had. Your orientation, your perception, your willingness to see things differently can change the thing itself, can change your experience itself. So there's that to take into consideration. But I
Mhm.
think a lot of people were feeling powerless and they were trying to figure out what's going on and how to understand that. And because we were literally more isolated from each other than ever before, yeah, I think astrology really helped a lot of people. Now, it'll
Mhm.
be interesting to see what happens with Neptune and Aries,
I
right?
was
Because that
yes.
is, yeah, yeah, that
Yeah,
is
which
spiritualizing the will, right? That's
right.
saying, believe it, be it. It's
Yeah.
all up to you. It's all on your shoulders. And that can be really empowering in a way too. But it'll be interesting to see how astrology responds to that because astrology is a living practice. Astrology adapts, it evolves to serve whatever historical moment or cultural context it finds itself in. We see
Mhm.
this again and again. It is a living practice. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I'll meet you there and we'll see how
Thank
we are
you.
part of astrology evolving to change the spiritual needs of people once Neptune moves into Aries.
Mhm. And it's interesting that you bring up Neptune's last movement through Pisces, which was the 1800s, which at the time, so many people turned to spiritualism and theosophy because they were abolitionists and they were very much opposed to the way Christianity was being used to condone slavery. And so you had a whole intellectual movement along with that spiritual movement. And we've really had that here since 2012. There's been this huge since when Neptune entered Pisces this time, and there are correspondences. And so I think what what is so beautiful about astrology and the way that you just framed that is that we can look back at what was happening during previous iterations of a cycle and see similar themes. So yeah, what you were talking about with the Saturn return in your own personal chart, it's like, oh, we see this culturally too.
Yeah. And what's interesting, because I actually think Neptune is deeply connected to an understanding of the ways in which and the people who are enslaved, if you will, and all the different ways that we might express that and the freedom from that. And there are, of course, layers, and there are, of course, structural, institutional ways in which oppression takes place, of course. And then there are those types of oppressions that we place on ourselves as well. And they're very insidious. And I think that Neptune speaks really powerfully to how that can actually transform and heal as well. And so, yes, slavery for the most part in pretty much most of the world with Neptune in Pisces was abolished. However, it wasn't until Neptune moved into Aries that people really felt like something had shifted, something had changed, or people became aware of it. Because for a lot of people, okay, slavery was abolished, but their lives didn't really change that much. Like they were doing their work, they were working on fields, for example. Slavery is abolished. They then became really low wage workers, but their society didn't change. Their experience of life didn't change. They still had all of those small moments of disrespect and dehumanization that are part of what allows a system like that to thrive. But it was with Neptune and Aries that more people became aware, okay, there is something else, there is an alternative, there is freedom that's possible, there are different ways, let's decide where we're going to go. They were able to have more agency over where they were going to be as well. And so it'll be interesting to see the different ways in which we now in our current and contemporary way take that on and work with that energy.
Right. And just for reference, because Neptune is moving into Aries, it starts its movement into Aries next year, right? Is
I think, yes,
Yeah.
2025, it
Yeah.
dips in. It just takes a
Mhm.
little bit of a step
Mhm.
in and then it retrogrades out. But 2026 is huge. Like
Huge.
I have been saying since 20, I remember in 2017 and 2016 talking about this. And in 2018, I did these decade ahead horoscope videos where I really talked about this. But I have been saying the world that we had at the very beginning of the 2020s will be a very different world than we will have at the end of the 2020s. And there's just been so much that's indicated this. Of course, the conjunction of Pluto and Saturn that happened in January of 2020, which is what a lot of people attribute the whole social distancing, social restriction, all of that. And in a sense, yes, that is a part of it because it is Capricorn and it is about structure and certain ordinances being pronounced, and you have to go along with it. But there was other very important things taking place at what we call 0 degrees of Aquarius. And I think that indicated social restriction in addition to the structures themselves making their pronouncements. And that was actually in March of 2020. Saturn and Mars both met at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And right after that, the world shut down. And then at the end of the year, it was December, it was right at the winter
20th.
solstice. So
Yeah.
depending on where you're
Yeah.
on the planet, yeah, the
Mhm.
20th, the 21st, again, depending where you were, 0 degrees of Aquarius, we had what's called the Great Conjunction, which was Jupiter and Saturn. And those two meeting is considered a very hopeful sign. Whereas Saturn and Mars meeting, which they do every 2 years, not necessarily energy associated with hope as much because it can be it can feel very dire, it can feel very real, it can feel very consequential. But Jupiter and Saturn together is about manifesting the dream. And that conjunction only happens once every 20 years. And that was the announcement of vaccines, and that was more places in the world opening up. And so that really was the beginning of a whole new chapter, in a sense, the beginning of feeling like, okay, something is changing, can change for us. And so here we are now, right? I think that it is what's called the great sextile or the grand sextile. And so this is going to peak in 2026 and 2027, but we'll start feeling it next year in 2025. And this is going to be Neptune and Saturn at the very beginning of the sign of Aries. They're going to meet at 0 degrees of Aries. And so, talk about a brand new cycle for all of us. But then you add the fact that Uranus and Pluto are going to be trining each other, and they're both going to be speaking in sextile to that conjunction. You add to that the fact that there's going to be a period of time where Jupiter is standing across, and so thereby really activating that grand sextile. And one piece that I just really started to put together just recently is that the one thing I think a lot of people are looking at this, and yes, this is going to be huge. A lot is going to change very quickly. I think technology and our ability to be connected online is going to reach a whole other level. It's going to become so pervasive to the point where we no longer see it. And that's going to be where it really starts to reach out around the world. But one thing that a lot of people aren't taking into account is that Chiron is going to square Pluto.
Mhm.
And that is something that just like a click. I'm going to be teaching or speaking at a big conference in Australia in January. And one of the talks I'm going to be doing there is on Chiron and Taurus. And I think that's the piece that a lot of people aren't taking into consideration. But I think it's going to be really important. And in a way, thank goodness for that, because squares mean activity.
Mhm.
They mean we're asking questions. They mean we're working towards the change we desire. And I think with Chiron and Taurus, it's going to be about, can people keep up in terms of livelihood, in terms of opportunity, financial opportunity, and what is that going to look like? And so, yes, I think to answer your question, just about that Aries energy of Neptune and Saturn, I think it has to be understood in the context of this larger configuration, which I think speaks to how so much is going to change so quickly. The world we have at the end of the 2020s, in many ways, the real ebb part of it, the big transition part of it, is going to be taking place in part to that conjunction of Saturn and Neptune and all the ways in which it's connecting to other power players in the sky.
Right. Yeah. It's also at that 0 degree point is a world point, which means that that particular conjunction, the change that takes place in correspondence with that is a global shift. It's like you said, it's like a whole new I keep thinking that this is what Eckhart Tolle was writing about when he wrote The Whole New Earth.
Oh,
It's like
yeah.
that post Neptune Saturn conjunction.
We hope so, right? He spoke about a world of consciousness. That's really what it came down to. Interestingly, a bit of a side story. When A New Earth, when that came out, I remember he had this like webinar series with Oprah, right? And
Yeah.
this was yeah, remember that? That was
Uh-huh.
like
Yeah, it so
2007,
was.
2008.
Mhm.
And it was the first time we really saw anything like that, like real online streaming webinars, classes, and people calling in and stuff. And so it was really revolutionary for the time. Now it's just part of our world, right? It's how we're doing this right now. But with Eckhart Tolle, a couple of things stand out to me. One is that whole book is about the raise in consciousness. Yes. Okay, so I came across that whole webinar series when I had just started graduate school. And graduate school was pretty intense and experience for me. It wasn't easy. Of course, there's the academic part of it, how rigorous it is, how challenging it is on that level. And that's why it feels really rewarding when you get it done. When you get it done, you
Mhm.
got that degree. It's like, yes, I did it. And you know what you went through to get it. But the other thing that was really interesting was I remember when I arrived at graduate school, I was like 10 years older than everybody else. And I went to graduate school in England. And so I was living on campus with everybody as well. And so as soon as I got there, there were like constant parties, constant parties. As soon as I got there and I went into my flat,
Uh-huh.
The whole place smelled like marijuana, right? It just was like pervasive. And at that time, I haven't had a drink or a drug in like a long time, something like almost 24 years now. At the
Wow.
time, it was a few years in. And that was an important thing that I did for me, like just part of a big shift that I'd gone through, big transits I'd gone through earlier in the year 2000. And so I was like sort of in a place where I knew that isn't really for me, but I can have fun. I can have fun. There's
Yep.
lots of videos of me dancing it up around the world online. They're very easy to find. I do enjoy my life very much. But that piece of it, that alcohol, marijuana piece of it, just isn't for me. And that's fine. Other people can do it around me. I don't care. I really don't care. Having said that, yeah, I walk in and the whole place is like marijuana. And I remember very early on realizing that it is not for the world to be something else to serve me. It is for me to decide how to adjust myself to be where it is that I want to be. It is not for the world to be different. It is for me to decide if it's worth me adapting or not in a
Mm.
given context. That was a huge spiritual lesson that stayed with me. But the thing that really helped me, I will tell you, was the fact that before then, I used to need to sleep in silence, right? I wanted a lot of silence. And I remember even going to a neighbor. I lived in a high rise in Toronto. And at one point, going to a neighbor and saying, "Hey, do you mind keeping it down and turning your music down and stuff?" But it was then that I started listening to that Eckhart Tolle Oprah webinar, and I would fall asleep to it. And
Mm.
ever since then, I need to hear people talking in order to fall asleep. I need noise in order to fall asleep. And I just think about how that became a part of the stuff that had to do with consciousness and raising your consciousness so that you're aware of what is you and what is not you, right? What is ego? What is your wounds? The fact that became such a key part, an integral part of my psyche at that
Mhm.
time, right? So I think that's really powerful to consider that it is these very energies that speak so powerfully to an understanding of the mystery, right? It's the mystery. Eckhart Tolle talking about a raise in consciousness. And for me, that was my raise in consciousness, was hearing him constantly, was realizing that it isn't about me being angry and pushing and changing. That to me was a raise in consciousness. So, yeah, you mentioned Eckhart Tolle, and I thought about that. As a side note, I will say that my relocation chart, for those of you who are students of astrology, you might be familiar with relocation charts, which is basically looking at how you interact with and what parts of you come forward in different places on the planet. And so a lot of astrologers like to look at this in terms of where you want to visit, where you want a holiday, where you want to spend your birthday, because that speaks to where you want to be in the world on your birthday to get the best chart possible. Now, that is something I'm really into, but I think it's an excuse to travel. Like I need an excuse, but yeah. But anyways, it is in England, in that city in particular, in Canterbury, that Neptune conjuncts my IC. It moves to the fourth house. And so, yeah, there were a lot of parties going on where I
Wow.
was living. And it was up to me to decide what energy I was going to bring to it. It wasn't up to the world to be any different. That
Mm.
was my way in which Eckhart Tolle helped me out when I needed.
Incredible. And I think that could be actually something we could all use for when Neptune enters Aries. How can I be myself and elevate my consciousness and conscience maybe in a world that is catching up or in a world that is evolving and changing? Your story to me is just it's like a metaphor for the bigger picture of what we're all going to be going through over these next few years. And
Isn't it?
and,
Yeah.
yeah, it's incredible. It's like just it's a template almost. Now, going back to 2024, right now we have this eclipse series, both in March 25th and April 8th, and this podcast is coming out right in the middle of that. And then we also have another eclipse series in on the Aries Libra axis line in September and October. Do you think that this year really sets a stage for what's coming with Neptune's move into Aries and Saturn's move into Aries. What do you
I
think about
like that.
these? Go ahead.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really glad that you are putting the emphasis on the Aries part of it. Because, yeah, it's really big. We have these very big, very important eclipses that are going to be taking place. And eclipses, because they involve the nodes. And so, one of my books right now, before we started recording, I was telling you about the books I have in works. And I love, love, love to write. It's such a high for me, the whole process of writing. And
Mm.
so, I have 5 books right now that are out, published. And one of them is called The Universe is Wise and Loving, and it's about the nodes of the moon and historically why they've been important, but also how now we can see how the nodes are about aligning us with greater love and greater wisdom in a more meta sense, but they're also about aligning us with perhaps a vision or a path that is part of something better in our life. That if we've been listening to life and we strive to stay conscious and to align ourselves with what that higher vision might be, and we adapt to change in order to align with that, when nodes are activated, it's not that big a deal. But if you really are not somebody who necessarily thinks along those lines, nodes being activated are a really big deal because they can be almost like a shock, juddering you back into alignment with the path that the soul desired to walk before you incarnated. That's how important the nodes are. And eclipses involve the nodes. That is the key characteristic of them. You can't have an eclipse if you don't have the nodes involved. And when I look at these eclipses that are coming up this year, fascinating stuff. So, on the one hand, the eclipse that's going to be coming up within days of us recording this is a lunar eclipse. It is at 5 degrees of Libra. And what I really like about that eclipse is that it is speaking in supreme harmony, meaning it is trine Pluto. And so that eclipse, I think, is so powerful. It's like I said, lunar eclipse. It's about closure, but it's closure that's going to help us to feel empowered and powerful. But then it is that eclipse that happens in Aries that takes place on the 8th of April. It is at 19 of Aries. And what is happening exactly at 19 of Aries, right along with that solar eclipse? 19 of Aries, we're going to have the sun and the moon. That's the eclipse moment. And what we're also going to have is Chiron at 19 of Aries. This is huge. I think that this is going to be so powerful. This is a total solar eclipse. It is visible in much of the Americas. I'm going to be traveling to Niagara Falls to see the eclipse, the total eclipse. It'll be the first one of my life I see. And so if you are in the Americas, in particular, if you are in a place where you can see the eclipse light going away for 4 minutes and then coming back, it is going to be that eclipse that changes where you are and changes you more profoundly than it might be the case for others. But it's a total solar eclipse. And solar eclipses are like who you thought you were. And this is Aries energy. It really is about who you think you are, the truth about you, who you are, who you thought that was. In an instant, it's like it goes out and then you see it again, but it looks completely different. And I think we're going to see identities shifting in powerful ways. Whereas Libra is about our partners, it's about how we relate to others. So I think a lot of people with the lunar eclipse trine Pluto are sort of accepting what's happened in their relationships and what didn't, and what was meant to be and what wasn't, and making peace with all of it. It's the Aries solar eclipse that's going to bring new pathways. And I think wherever it is that we've been lying to ourselves, we've been telling ourselves that I'm truly me and I'm living my truth and I'm independent, where that isn't the case, I think we're going to see it differently. And all of that vulnerability is going to come to the surface. What led us to be hyper self sufficient? I just did an interview that'll publish right around the time that you published this. On my channel, I'll be publishing an interview with Michael Luton. He's a legendary astrologer. I love Michael Luton so much. And he was talking about how Chiron in Aries is about loneliness, that
Mm,
more of us feel alone and we think something's
mhm.
wrong with us because we're lonely. when we've been told that it's a good thing to be independent, to be self-sufficient, and all of that is really good. But there's the flip side to that, is that sometimes there can be moments where it feels isolating and it feels lonely. And I think a lot of that is going to stir for people.
Mm.
With the Aries eclipse, the other thing is, it isn't really making any major Ptolemaic aspects. So Ptolemaic aspects come from a book called Tetrabiblos by Ptolemy. It is maybe controversially, maybe widely considered the foundational text to Western astrology. It's about 1900 years old, about that. So it goes back a while. And it is in this book that Ptolemy outlines certain very specific types of conversations that planets will have. These are considered very foundational and very important types of mathematically precise alignments that planets will make with each other. This eclipse isn't making any Ptolemaic aspects. And that tells me that, again, there's this isolating quality to it, this sense that this is about your personal journey, what you are understanding, what wounds you may need to look at that led you or each of us, right, as part of our individual journey. And maybe in a particular area of life, depending on what house that eclipse is taking place in. If you are a student of astrology, you understand houses are areas of life. And so that eclipse is going to happen in one area of life or another. And when you understand that, it is about acknowledging how, while you can feel good about being independent, there is also that sense of vulnerability that arises now by acknowledging that it isn't always a life that feels fulfilling if you are hyper independent, if you
Mhm.
don't allow yourself to be vulnerable. And being vulnerable, it's really interesting. Okay. About over 3 years ago, I ended a 7-year relationship.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, that was a really big deal. Big things were happening in my
Mm,
chart, and that relationship ended.
mm,
And it's always a bit of a, it's really hard in the beginning, right? Because
mhm.
especially when there's been so much hope, and this is somebody that I imagined myself with infinitely. And then also, he had a dog that I loved. Oh my God, I loved this dog. He was my best friend for a while. His name was Biggie Smalls.
I
I shared
remember.
him. Yeah,
I
yeah, you remember
love
Biggie
him.
Smalls? Yeah, I
Yes.
love Biggie
Oh.
Smalls. I still love Biggie. I still think about Biggie Smalls sometimes, like, oh my God, this Biggie. But since then, okay, it's been
Uh-huh.
almost 3.5 years. I've had some interesting experiences in the context of love, and certain moments I've gone through where I've had to like sort of regroup for a moment and check out different sources of wisdom. And so, a dear friend of mine, Rosa, who I met in Brazil, Brazil has been a place that sort of captured my heart lately, and I've been spending a lot of time there over the last year. And so Rosa and I were both big fans of this dating coach named Matthew Hussey. He's
Okay.
got like 3 million people
Oh,
on YouTube, 3 million
wow.
on TikTok. Yeah, you're in a happy marriage, Rachel, so you
Yeah.
wouldn't need to know about Matthew Hussey. But the rest of us who are out here, right? We know about
Oh.
Matthew Hussey if you're
Uh-huh.
out there. And so he's so interesting and he's got great advice. And so one of the recent clips of his that went viral on TikTok where he is saying that when you meet somebody, you can't know if that person is going to betray you. You
Mhm,
can't know
mhm,
whether or not that person is going to hurt you. All you can really know is whatever this person decides to do, you're going to be okay.
mhm,
That you don't need to betray yourself, that you're going to be there for you.
mm,
And that is a position of strength from which to approach any relationship that you might be in now, that you might be in the future. And when I look at this eclipse in Aries, and how it is exactly in alignment with Chiron in Aries, a 19-degree solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse conjuncted 19-degree Chiron. I cannot but think that this is going to be that very awakening for a lot of us out there, that
mhm,
we can't control what other people do, and that it's hard to be vulnerable, yes. But if you trust yourself, then whatever another person decides, you're going to be okay
mhm,
because you know that you can go in, you can be vulnerable, but that's your journey, that's your process. And it is okay. It is okay. It doesn't make it right, as Whitney Houston once sang, right? It's not right, but it's okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not right, but it's okay. Whatever needs to happen with another person, you can be vulnerable. You can feel exposed. You can feel raw. You can feel uncertain. But whatever another person decides to do with that, you're going to be okay. And we need to come to that understanding if we're ever going to love at all, if we're ever going to take a chance at all enough to believe that we can have partnership, to have love, even to have friendship. In
Mhm.
order to have people in our lives at all, we need to come to that understanding within ourselves in one way or another. And it'll be
Mhm.
interesting to see how more of us.
I think that it's interesting as you were saying the word vulnerable, Caroline Casey, who's going to be on my show next week. Cara, I know I love her. She's another astrologer. She talks about how the root word of vulnerability comes from war, and it is the root word is, or the etymology of it is capable of being wounded. And so it's interesting how Aries is is the sign associated with war. The North node's in Aries. This eclipse is in Aries. Chiron's in Aries, and I think there are layers of symbolism here for what you're saying too. It's the that love, we're moving from the idea of love as a battlefield, using a Joan Jett reference, or Pat Benatar, I'm sorry. So we're moving from love as this battlefield to love as being more available, as opening ourselves up. I love how you framed that, where we can't control what happens in our relationships or what our partners do, but we can be in our integrity, be in our hearts, and love the way that we can. And it's similar to what you were saying about, I'm putting all these pieces together, Nadia, but it's similar to what you were saying about your experience with Eckhart Tolle and your experience of that consciousness raising Neptune in on the IC. So anything you want to riff on all of these pieces coming together?
Yeah, I think it's powerful to consider how much of our perception and our consciousness is molded by our wounds, our expectations that are rooted in wounds, our ego, what our ego demands, which is often rooted in our wounds as well. And we don't really know who we are unless we're, at the very least, willing to acknowledge those wounds. And I think once you do, it's incredible how you move through the world taking less things personally, right? Now, it's not, of course, an exact science, it's a spiritual journey, it's a journey of a lifetime. It's what we signed up to do as human beings in this incarnation. But it is a powerful thing when you catch it. Like it is, even to this day, like if somebody does something and I'm able to, oh, okay, I want to react this way, but I know that's my wound. So I'm choosing not to react that way because instead I can do this. And it is a skill, but it is a skill that leads you to the purest part of you, the part of you that knows, that has trust, that knows you're okay as you are right now in this moment today. And my hope is that more and more of us get to that point. I want to also remind people that Mercury is going to be retrograde,
Mhm. Yes.
not
Yes.
far away from the eclipse. Yeah,
Mhm.
right there near the eclipse, retrograde as well. That to me is really huge. I think that Venus is going to be newly in Aries at
Mhm.
that point as well. Venus, yep, moves into Aries on the 5th of April. If you're in the Americas, it's the 4th of April. And so we are going to have this conglomerate of energy, right? This powerhouse of energy playing out. And it's all speaking to self. It's
Mhm.
all speaking to you. It's speaking to the individual. Now, I just want to also add one other thing that I may want to leave your audience with, and that is I'm a big believer that when we have transiting nodes meeting other planets or placements, that is a really big deal as well because that doorway activates. I see the nodes as representing doorways. From the north node being activated, new people, places, things, situations enter, which represent karmic blessings that pull you towards greater love and greater wisdom in a more meta sense. With the South Node, it is people, places, things, situations ending. And that is the massive karmic blessing. That is a sense like, oh, thank goodness that chapter is over. Now, it
Mhm.
doesn't always feel like that in the moment. Often it does feel like, oh, you feel relief in the moment. Sometimes it takes a little bit more time to get there, but you get there soon enough. And so, what we are going to have in April is we are going to have Venus and the sun with precision meeting the North Node at key points. And I think this is going to be really huge. You add to this, Mercury is going to station direct on the 25th, right there, hand in hand with the North Node as well. I think there are very big new beginnings that are set to take place. And if ever there was a time to really be open to what a higher, more loving vision for your life might be, if ever there was a time to really be open to what new might come in if you didn't stand in the way, if you didn't tell the universe what it is that you should be happening, that must be happening, if you didn't dictate to the universe, what is it that if you get out of the way that might come in, just observe, just pay attention, because very often it is a bigger dream than anything we could dream for ourselves. And I think that's hard with Aries energy to really grapple with. And yet, brand new ways to really be ourselves
Mhm.
just might show up in April, which I think April just might end up being the most important month of
I think so too.
2024 in a lot of ways.
I agree. And I think that's a beautiful note to close this show on. I had so much more I wanted to talk to you about. So I would love to
There's
have you
always
back.
more. Of
I would love to have
course,
you back. We could talk about Daddy Yankee and all kinds of other
always.
things.
All roads lead to Daddy Yankee with me. Thank you for mentioning Daddy Yankee
Yeah.
because you guys follow me online. All roads lead to Daddy Yankee for me. And Daddy Yankee was like this wonderful healing presence in my life after my breakup. I'd
Mm,
sort of let music go. I'd stopped really moving or dancing or really enjoying life. For years, I was numb those last few years of my relationship. And it really was Daddy Yankee's music that kind of restored that energy and that feeling of life. And so I'm so grateful for his music. I'm grateful that you mentioned him. I wish I could know his time of birth. It really is very challenging not to know his time of birth, but we try to figure it out as we go along. And yeah, there's so much to talk about, Rachel. And of course, I would love, love, love to have you back at
great.
Synchronicity University in any capacity you would like. If you want to teach a single class, if you want to teach a course, I think you are a
Thank you.
brilliant astrologer and I love working with you. And again, congratulations on this incredible endeavor, your brand new podcast. I'm wishing you so, so well. I hope you enjoy this journey and
Um,
process of really uncovering and sharing astrology in more and more ways.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Good.
I adore you.
Yay. I adore you too. If you want to find out more about Nadiya Shah, you can find her on her YouTube channel, which has incredible content from other astrologers and from Nadia as well. Lots of great videos there. And you can also find out more at Synchronicity University, which is the school that she started, an online school. And she features some of the best astrologers in the world, and some new up and coming astrologers. And you can find great astrology content. You can take workshops and classes. I'm actually teaching a class, a second part of the class I taught on money, modern money magic, and I'll be teaching that later this fall. So find out more at synchronicityunicom. Now, it's time for the weekly segment that we call our cosmic call to action. The cosmic call to action is a way to take your own consciousness and to apply some of the astrology and some of the spiritual themes of the week to your everyday life, how to put them into practice. Now, I am certified in feng shui. My spouse is a feng shui author, my wife Tisha, as many of you. And so I know the power of decluttering and what decluttering can do in your life. And since Mercury is stationing retrograde on the 1st, one of my favorite activities to do during Mercury retrograde is to declutter. So go through your house and your living space and find 3 things that it's time to let go. Now, this could be old photos of your ex that trigger a little bit of sadness every time you see them. This could be your mother's wedding dress or a necklace that was given to you by someone that you no longer have a connection with. The key is there are things in our space that are taking up space and that are stirring up emotions that might not be productive for what we are trying to create in our lives moving forward. So, getting rid of, purging, getting rid of items that do have that emotional resonance can actually free up space for other things, for things that you're creating in your life. So, go through your home, clear out 3 things, at least 3 things. They say that my wife says that if you move 27 items in your space, you can change your life. And so you might take this a step further, but start with 3 things. That's your cosmic call to action. It has been so wonderful being with you today and helping guide you through this important time in our history. So have a wonderful week. Have a introspective week, and we'll be back next week with Caroline Casey.